right, everybody, we're gonna take one more lesson tonight on chapter 11. And then
Thank you.
you go. All right. So we'll take one more lesson tonight on chapter 11, and then we'll have 2 months, which is probably 8 lessons to finish up the last 5 chapters in Romans. So that's our rough schedule. So what I want to do tonight is I do want to break into groups. So I'd like to take just about 10 minutes or so and finish up this little synopsis of the chapter. The paper that you have, you see all of those groupings, the verses. I would like for you just to be able to put a heading or some sort of summary of your own words about what that section taught. So we'll do that pretty quickly. Then I would like for us to break into groups, and having groups that talk will be really important tonight. So if that means we only have 2, so that the talkers are in one of those 2, either of those groups, that'll be fine. If we have 3 and it's real quiet, that doesn't accomplish what I'm wanting it to accomplish. You might like it, but you're not teaching, so you don't get to make the rules. When you teach, you can make the rules, but until then, it'll be the way I want it to go. So I don't get to do that anywhere else, not even at home or work, but I get to do that here. So I want to use that power. You think I'm joking about home, but that's not a joke. All right, so did everybody get a paper for tonight? It's the same one from last week. If not, I've got some and you're welcome to them, but I think everybody did. All right, so in Romans, remember the section we're in, chapters 9 through 10. It's dealing with that Israel issue, that the physical nation of Israel at the time Paul was living and writing, most of them were not in Christ. In fact, they not only were not in Christ, they were enemies of the gospel. And that poses a problem because it raises questions about everything that God had been doing with them and for them and promises he had been making to them for years, hundreds of years, thousands of years. So it raises questions like verse 1, when it says, I say then, God has not rejected his people, has he? That's the question he's asking. Has God rejected them? And his answer to that is a absolute no. And he'll give his reasons for that. Again, verse 11, you'll see another question. I say then, they did not stumble so as to fall, did they? Again, he's still talking about Israel. And wants to know, was their stumbling so great that they have now fallen, and in my words, fallen beyond recovery? That they cannot be saved, that cannot be redeemed, cannot be brought back. And so it's raising those kind of questions. Now, while we may not be intimately interested in these questions because of Israel being the subject, we should be interested in them because whatever it says about God dealing with his people then, that people, it says the same about his dealings with us. We would be concerned about that. We would want to know. So when we get down later in the chapter and it says something about God, that the calling, the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable, we may struggle with that as it applies to Israel, but I guarantee you this, as a child of God, you're going to be really glad to know that that's true about God. That when he calls and when he gives a gift, he does not take it back. You're going to be really thankful that that's how he is. So don't deprive them of that when we say, oh, we want that. We want God to be that way with us. Well, that's what he's showing about God's nature. That's how he is. So verses 1 through 6, we went through this last week, answering the question, has God rejected his people? And the answer to that was no. And in fact, what did he have for himself even at that present time? A remnant. Still belong to God. So that's my summary of verses 1 through 6. God has not rejected his people. He's always kept a remnant for himself, and he has a remnant at that present time. All right, so what then would be Israel's condition, verses 7 through 10? What is their current state? The physical nation. Now, Paul says there is this gracious remnant, there is this chosen portion, but what has happened to the rest here in verses 7 through 10? They've been hardened. Does anybody's version say hard or just hardened? Mine just says hardened. Doesn't indicate heart, just that a hardening has happened. So, blinded or hardened. I think that from what I saw, the word could be translated either way, hardened or blinded. So what has happened to Israel, God has not rejected them, but the chosen, the gracious remnant exists, but also there is this other part that he says which has been hardened. All right, so verses 11 through 16 ask the question about their stumbling, and we talked about it last week. And Lance, if you don't mind reading verse 11 again from your version, I thought it summed up pretty well what at least the intent of the question was. Romans chapter 11, verse 11.
Did God's people stumble and fall beyond recovery?
Beyond recovery.
Of course not. They were disobedient, so God made salvation available to the Gentiles. But he wanted his own people to become jealous and claim it for themselves. Now the Gentiles were enriched because the people of Israel turned down God's offer of salvation. Then think how much greater a blessing the world will share when they finally accept it.
Thank you.
That's the 12.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I was especially interested in that. Have they fallen beyond recovery or stumbled beyond recovery? And I think that is the intent of the question. Is there is a stumbling, but is it so severe that they can't recover from it? And the answer to that was no, they've not stumbled that way. But God has used that stumbling. Verses 11 through 16 will also call it their transgression, their failure, and their rejection. And he has used it how? How has he used Israel's stumbling, as Paul was writing? To bring what? Salvation to Gentiles in particular. That's how he's used it. So just process the facts as he's giving them to us. And says that was God's use of that hardening, that stumbling, that failure, transgression, and rejection. But he also says at the end of this that they're not beyond hope. And I don't know how much time we spent on it last week, probably not much. But verse 16 says, if the first piece of dough is holy, the lump is also. And if the root is holy, the branches are too. Who is he talking about there? Talking about who? Holly mouth. I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, I have guesses, but I'm still.
He's still talking about Israel. And he's saying, if the first parts of Israel were holy, which would be who? I think it's, did you say Abraham? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. If the first parts were holy, sanctified, then what about the rest of the dough? He's saying they too are holy people. And if he says in terms of like now changing figures from dough to a tree or something that has roots and branches, if the root is holy, the branches are too. So Israel comes from holy stock. They descend from Abraham. And Abraham wasn't just anybody. Abraham is called what of God? The friend of God. So much of what's going to be said is that the favor that is shown them is very often just for Abraham's sake, for the sake of the fathers. And so he's just going back in their history and helping us to appreciate their place with God. Holy, sanctified, because the first part was, so is the offspring.
So is he saying, even at this point, that most of Israel is hardened, but because that their roots were holy. If you use holy as in set apart, I don't mean like they're righteous, but if you use holy as set apart, even though they are hardened, they are still a set apart people. That God's not. Is that that God's not saying they're no longer His people? They're just His people who are hardened. Because if they were
that's exactly how I'm hearing it.
I mean, that's how I am too. But I was like, is that what He's saying? That even though they're hard, they're still my set apart people.
That's exactly how I'm hearing it.
Okay, me too. I just didn't
Now,
know if
whether
that was-
everybody else agrees with that, that's for you all to discuss. But that if that's not it, I don't know what he's saying. I really don't know any other way to look at that. Sometimes people try to change definitions within this context. You know how we've done that with Israel before, and not all of Israel is Israel. True Jew is one that's circumcised in heart. But he doesn't seem to be bouncing around with his definitions of Israel here. He says, look, they're descendants. I'm a descendant. He talks about his kinsmen according to the flesh. It looks like he's talking about fleshly, physical Israel that existed at that time. What was their condition with God? What was their position? He said, well, there was within that nation this gracious remnant that he chose. But also the rest have been hardened. And that's the part that he's concerned about, is this part that's been hardened. And I think at the end I might have mentioned to you the way I look at that, is I think, for example, Paul is a perfect example of that himself. What was his initial reaction to the gospel? His initial reaction, what was it? He didn't believe it. He not only was hardened, he became the most violent enemy the Christians had. But what ultimately happened to Paul? Did that hardening cease at some point? It did. And yet, what did his hardening allow? For all of these what? Gentiles to be brought in, this fullness to be brought in. So I suggested to you last week, however you want to look at that, about the hardening and the Gentiles being brought in, the hardening ceasing, I see it being played out in the book of Acts. Everywhere they went, it happened that way. Almost always there would be within any city where there were Jews, some that believed, some that came to faith right away. The rest did what? They were hardened. During that time that they were hardened, what was happening? Gentiles within that city were what? Flowing in. The fullness of the Gentiles were coming in and rejoicing to be brought in. Antioch of Pisidia, they were rejoicing that when Paul said, now we'll go to the Gentiles. So I see it just unfolding all along that this is happening. You guys certainly will make up your own minds about it, but I don't see it as like something he's saying is only going to happen way off in the future. He's just identifying for us they're hardened right now, but there's a way God's using it, and that is to bring these Gentiles in. And I even suggested to you last week that had it gone any other way, had it just been an overwhelming Jewish response to the gospel and to Christ, what would have been the reaction of most Gentiles to that? It would have looked to all of us like what? This is just a continuation of the whole Old Testament thing. There is people and we're what? Huh? And we're not. We're the stepchildren. We're the ones on the outside. What did this hardening give a chance to bring in the fullness of the Gentile? And so bring them in that what's happened in Romans is not only are they're not going around with their heads, the Gentiles aren't going around with their heads hung low saying, oh, we're so pitiful. They're what? They're prideful. They're saying, we're now the people and you guys have been cut off. So what he's doing right here is he's humbling that, taking away that arrogance and saying, yes, they've been cut off. They've been broken off. For what reason? Because they've not believed. And you've been grafted in. But if they believe, God will do what? He will graft them back in again. So I'm just giving you my explanation. I don't deny at all that there are some difficult things in here. But I think I get the gist of it. That he was saying within Israel there was this gracious remnant that would receive the gospel right away. The rest are hardened. And that hardening was used to bring in the fullness of the Gentiles. Okay, so trying to summarize these things, I really want to give you guys a chance to break into groups tonight. So verses 17 through 24, God's people are seen as this beautiful cultivated tree, probably an olive tree, and Israel has been cut off. Again, for what reason have the branches been broken off? Because of their unbelief. Verse 20, and the Gentiles have been grafted in because of their belief, implied. It's because they did believe. The Jews did not, so they've been broken off. But Paul says if they cease in this unbelief, they will be grafted back in again. God is able to do that and will do that. So verses 25 through 27, he gets right down to it and says that I'm speaking to you, and I don't want you to be proud because I'm telling you a mystery. And that mystery is this, that a partial hardening has happened to Israel. 5 times in this chapter he uses the word Israel. Verse 1, verse 2, verse 7, verse 25, verse 26. So get in your head who he's talking about. He's talking about Israel in all of this. So all of these other pronouns he's using referring back to Israel. But this mystery is there is a partial hardening that has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Now, it doesn't say it in so many words, but is it implied that this hardening would cease once the fullness of the Gentiles have come in? Laura says,
I think so.
yes, thank you. I appreciate the help. Anybody else want to venture us?
What was the question?
It doesn't say that this hardening would cease, but is it implied when it says that the partial hardening has occurred until the fullness of the Gentiles have come in? Is it implied that once that fullness has they've come in, that the partial hardening would cease? That's my question to you. Jim says yes. I'm not going to tell you, hey, if there's a right or a wrong. I'm just going to say it sounds like it's implied to me that he's saying that it's partial. It's not full. It's not like it's a hardening that can't be undone. I think that's the whole idea of it, is that it will cease when that fullness of the Gentiles have come in. And so then he supports that. Then he makes a statement that's even broader and more encompassing than that. Then he says, verse 26, and so all Israel will be saved. So that's where he's at. He's looking at all of them, and he's saying this is the case. Whether we wrestle with that, struggle with that or not, that's the mystery that he is revealing, that this partial hardening has happened. I think that he's implying that it will be undone when the fullness of the Gentiles come in, and then all of Israel will be saved. You guys can ask questions if you want. I don't have much more to tell you about it than just what I think about it, but happy to couch it.
In this context, is he talking about all Jewish people, all Jewish people in Israel, or like? I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around when he says Israel. Are we talking what demographic? I guess what are we? What exactly is he trying to imply?
The way that I think that he's used Israel in this letter, has, especially in these chapters, has been when he says back earlier, chapter 10, my kinsmen according to the flesh. He's talking about fleshly Israel, those descendants of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, that God has chosen, that he went into covenant relationship with, who also were known as the Jews. I don't think Jews and Israelites were used separately, but they just different designations. Jew was a very late designation. It really was not even used until the time of captivity. Before that, Jew was not even the designation used of God's people. It was Israelites or Hebrews. So I think he's talking about the physical nation. I don't know any way to come up with a better definition. I do know that he has stated earlier, not all of Israel is Israel. He's done some qualifying for us. But it seems to me like he's looking at the nation as a whole at this point. But you guys are, and none of it bothers me. it challenges my thinking about it, because that's not really what I was taught in terms of the nation of Israel. I was taught God did away with them right away. And then he did what? He changed Israel, and we became Israel. Now we're all Israel. We're new Israel. And so they're just done and undone. This challenges completely that concept up to me. And I don't feel compelled to have to defend either one, do you? I want to hear what God is saying to me. And I hear him very clearly saying, this is a people that I've used and that are special to me. He's going to tell us in just a minute why they're special to him, and that he has plans, and that he had plans, and that what he chooses to do with them. Don't miss this. When we end this chapter, he's going to end with saying, God's ways are unsearchable. You cannot fathom his ways. And so we want to understand the full picture of it. He's saying, but I'm telling you a mystery. So I'm telling you something that's hard to grasp to begin with. But don't become arrogant. Don't begin thinking God has just thrown them away, broke promises that he made to them, rejected what he said to the fathers, because has not done that.
I read this, I don't know, I guess with my more open viewpoint for the first time last year. And I felt like, I know I had read Romans. I know I've sat in classes about Romans, but I felt like I had never seen Romans last year when I was looking at it with a more of an open mind. And it was really convicting, because that do not boast. I was like, man, I've always felt that internally superior to Jews. Because it's like, well, if they rejected Jesus, they still reject Jesus. They're as lost as, last year's Easter egg. And so I always had that. And so when I read this, I'm like, that still applies. Like for me to be so arrogant as a Gentile towards God's chosen people. I know, it's been, 2,000 years since Christ has ascended, but still, it's like that's, even though they're still in a lost state, they can still, a lot of them can still absolutely trace their lineage back to Abraham. They're still those same people. And so that really humbled me from my arrogance. I was like, oh, that's stepping on my toes to look at them like that. And when you get to verses 25 and 26 and 27, I'm very open-handed on this. I don't have the need to defend either side either, but it's really hard to look at it and completely be sold on that replacement theology. That God is done with Israel. He's been done with Israel ever since they denied Jesus. Shut the book, moving on. That's how I'd always thought. But when you read this, I can't be close-handed on that. You know what I mean? It's like if the Lord chooses to redeem his people in some way in the future, then he will. Like that, it's just, to me, it's an open-handed thing. And at least I've got rid of my arrogance on all these end-time stuff about Israel. I don't know. I've studied end-time prophecies for the last 2 years, and I think the more I know, the less I know. But it's an opening, humbling thing to not be so convicted of, well, that's not what it's going to be, and that's not what it's going to be. It's like, I can kind of see how it might be any of those things. And that's okay, because God will do what God's going to do. But yeah, reading those verses, I don't see how you can close the book and say God is done with the descendants of Abraham. Like, it's just not, I don't see it being closed in the book. But that's all I have to say.
Well said. Well said. I am so happy she's in class.
That's my convictions of last year and now.
I am so happy you're with us. Would everybody agree with the statement that she made that this section is intended to humble us? That's exactly what he said it was supposed to do. I don't want you to be arrogant, and so we're supposed to be humbled from this. So if we still walk away with some sort of superior attitude toward the Jewish people, the physical nation of Israel, then I don't think we have heard what he's trying to say to us. So, but again, just think about it yourself. Read through it, reread through it, check yourself, and see what you come up with. All right. So, one last thing, and this is real important. So after having said that about the partial hardening, all Israel being saved, verse 28 gives us a real clear picture of how they stood right at the moment when Paul was writing. He says, verse 28, from the standpoint of the gospel, what was the nation of Israel right then? enemies. They're enemies. That's because most of them have been rejected Jesus, and they're enemies. And so Paul said that's easy for us to see. But there's more to this story than just that. Because he goes on to say, but from the standpoint of God's choice, what are they? They're loved. They're beloved for the sake of the fathers. So again, just that whole thing about that first part of the dough being holy and the roots being holy, and so the branches, he said, so it is you can see what they are right now, Paul says. They're enemies. But also you've got to see God's perspective on this is that they are beloved. He's loved them. He has used them. He has carried them. When Jesus wept over them, he didn't hate them. He loved them, and he wanted them to come to him. And so he said, in essence, I have stretched out my hands all day long toward this people. So that's how they were being viewed at that present time. Enemies, yes, because they have not accepted Christ, not accepted his gospel. But from the standpoint of the fathers, God's promises to the fathers, they are beloved. So, here's bottom line to all of this. God used their disobedience in verse 31, the disobedience of Israel, to show mercy to the Gentiles, to be able to show it to them and to all. And then he says, so these also, again going back to Israel, verse 31, now have been disobedient, that because of the mercy shown to you, they also may now be shown mercy. For God has shut up all in disobedience, so that he may show mercy to all. That's the bottom line of what God wants to do, is he wants to be able to show mercy to all, to Jew and Gentile. And so there is no room for arrogance or a thinking that one is preferred over the other. And then here's how it closes. Paul says, and if you feel overwhelmed by this, if you feel like, man, that is so deep, that is so beyond me, that's exactly how Paul felt. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and the knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and unfathomable his ways. Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who became his counselor, or who has first given to him that it might be paid back to him again? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. And that is just a reminder of the awesome depth and wisdom and unsearchableness of God's wisdom and his ways. In particular, as he's telling us about what he was doing at that present time. So here's what I'd like for you guys to do. I'd like for you to break into groups and just go back through the chapter and ask one simple question. What does this chapter say about Israel? What does it say about them? If you'd like to break it down further than that, past, present, and future. What does it say about Israel? All right? And so go ahead and break into your groups, and then we'll start together, and then you can finish it up in your group and talk and discuss and be candid with one another, and then we'll share what we get. So go ahead and break into groups, and it may just need to be 2 tonight. Just make sure that you grab a talker for your group.
We got to talk right here.
This group's good. This group's pretty good. This group's pretty good. I'm not sure about back there, so make sure you grab a talker. Sean turned and looked right at you. Yeah, if Kevin will just do stuff, stay right there. If you
Yes.
Feel free to mingle with the other people. So, all right. So while you're in the groups now, so my question was, what does this chapter say about Israel? So let's just work through a couple of verses together. What does verse 1 say about Israel? I say then, God has not rejected his people, has he? So what would you say it says about Israel? Verse 1. They have not been rejected. So that's present. Right now, as Paul was talking about that, he said, they've not been rejected. So he is not rejected. And in case you're wondering about who he's talking about, he says, because if that's true, then what about Paul? He would say, that means me. Because I'm of that nation. I'm one of those people. I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. So if they've been rejected, then I also have been rejected. So that's not the case. So that's the idea that I want you just to look down through there, see what it says about Israel. What about verse 2? God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. They were foreknown. God has known them. He's known them from before knowledge was known. So God foreknew them. So just go down through there and write down everything you see about Israel. Past, present, and future. So somebody just start leading your group saying, all right, here we are, verse 3, verse 4, verse 5. What do you guys see about Israel?